back. I'm Jay Fidell. This is Movies We Can Learn From. And my friend over there is George Casen. And we're going to talk about Crip Camp. Oh, you're going to learn a lot about Crip Camp. It's a documentary, and we'll be discussing it in great detail and in the historical context right after this. George, you recommended this movie. You are very familiar, I suppose, with Crip Camp, and that stands for crippled, disabled. Camp, what was the name of the camp? The Jeanette?
Camp Jeanette.
Yeah,
Hunter, New York.
Yeah, upstate New York. And in those days, we're talking about what, the 60s, the 70s?
Yeah.
These camps were very idealistic, very altruistic. They were social work type of camps. People were so kind to each other. They were inventing a new kind of humanity. And this was one of those camps. But this camp was different from the other social work type of camp that was being developed and refined in those days. This camp was for people who were handicapped. So let's talk about it, because there's a lot to say. The movie itself, I'm afraid, is not a high production value movie. It uses old black and white footage for most of it, but it is a documentary, and it brings together that footage with the actual events that are happening in the country politically. We don't know. We lived with the ADA in 1990. We studied it in school, I suppose. In law school, it was important. And in practice of law, it was important. The ADA. But this is how it all got started. This is America's awakening on what it means to be handicapped.
Exactly.
All right, George, why did you pick this movie?
Well, you had displayed 4 different documentaries that we should consider to review. And for me, this is very personal. I have Dr. Solomon, my ophthalmologist, when I was 4 or 5 years old, diagnosed me with something called lazy eye. My left eye, I have no functional use of my left eye. I mean, it's so blind that I can't use it. I mean, I can't read. I can't do anything with that eye. Thank God I got one good eye. So I've always had this issue, right? But through life, sometimes you can modify, So I've got this sense, sometimes that there's something over there, on that side. But so this is very personal for me. So when I saw those 4 options, I said, this one is the one I want to do. And you are right that this movie, the documentary, it sort of drags. The quality of the scenes is all old film. But they wanted to show this actually how it was in the 60s and the early 70s. So it's got issues, with that. But I mean, the points is that this is a critical issue, and for me, Jay, this is critical even now because I've been terminated twice because of this problem, and I never spoke about it. And then at UH, this disability head, Ann, she was the head of it. She told me, when you go for a job, after you go to a job, tell your employer that you've got a disability. But what happened twice, first with an architecture firm, my supervisor, she couldn't handle the fact that when she's reviewing my reports that I haven't coded it properly. So she was very upset about that. So they let me go. And then I was working for a state agency, and I did exactly what the head of the PACUA had told me at UH, tell your employer. And she starts screaming, my supervisor, we can't have that. And they terminated me. But, I don't sue. So I just figured I'll move on. I was at the DOT, and I had a great supervisor. I was directly related, working under him. And he was wonderful, but I wanted to do art environmental, so I went to another agency, and there were problems. So to make a bottom line, this is very much apropos for me individually. And let me know if you want me to get into the movie, because I remember each of the different steps. You tell me if you want me to do that.
Let me share some thoughts with you about it. Yeah. The one thing that struck me is, you start out by saying these people are handicapped and they'll never be able to, cope in the world. They'll never be able to enjoy, the same kinds of privileges and possibilities that, the average person. The country's not set up for that, even now. Okay. But you look back at a movie back in, what was it, the 70s, I guess?
Yeah, 60s.
And the movie shows you how they lived, how they thought. And kids, they're kids. These are, young kids, and
Teenage.
and their communications, their groups, the society together in the summer camp. And the physical structure of the summer camp is not important. It never is. What's important is the way it's managed, and the professionals who are there, and the volunteers who are there to try to make life more palatable. And when you look at this movie, any number of clips, I mean, hundreds of clips actually, about these kids kind of coming out. They live in the protective environment of their families. And my first reaction was, gee whiz, what a lucky kid. Because, you could easily not be in the protective environment of your family, and you could waste away. And there were shots of people who had wasted away in state facilities. And that was really awful. And these handicapped kids go in those facilities and they see those people wasting away. It's just horrible to watch. And then you say, well, but their parents really cared about them. Maybe in some cases too much, because they were very protective of them, and they didn't want them to, be exposed to unpleasantness or danger. And so then the kids get together in the camp, and the kids talk to each other, and they find there's a community among them, and they find that life is more than being, protected by your parents, however lucky you are that you are being protected by your parents. And they find that they can talk to other people similarly situated, and they find it's a beautiful thing. And they find that they can have relationships they never thought they could have. They can do things they never thought they could do. But I guess the most important thing is that there were kindred spirits, there were kindred souls who understood them, because those kindred souls were like them. And different kinds of handicaps, lots of handicaps there, but a handicapped person can talk to another handicapped person as different than an ordinary person can talk to a handicapped person. They fully understand each other that way. And it goes further. It goes to, accomplishing things, finding valuable channels for their energy, and including their intellectual energy, finding ways to accomplish things, even though they're handicapped. They maybe can't move, can't talk, can't control themselves for one reason or another because of their handicap. And even more, I mean, it really touched me that they fell in love with each other. They had relationships. They dated, even though a regular person wouldn't be too interested in that. And exactly how are you going to have sex, for example? But these kids were liberated. They were not protected at all. They were by their staff, by the staff of the camp, the management of the camp, the volunteers, social workers around them. There was no limit. They were not subject to limits. They could think anything, say anything, be as much of a regular person as they wanted to be, enjoy relationships as much as they wanted to enjoy. And sometimes it sets you back. Why are they so flip about these things? Why are they saying and doing these things and aspiring, for example, to male-female relationships that way? It's because the camp doesn't put guardrails around them.
Exactly.
You can do whatever you want. This is your opportunity to catch up on life in the normal lane. And you can imagine what happens. These kids blossom. It's hard to watch them with those disabilities. It's hard to watch when they can't walk, and they can't talk right, and they can't hold their body right. But They have been emancipated like a butterfly. Very touching. That's what I got out of it. But there's another element that I think you should talk about. It's the fact that these people were so excited, as youngsters, and the people around them were so excited. They said, "What's wrong with this country? Why do we have to go to camp to do these things? Why doesn't the country understand who we are? Why doesn't the country treat us like human beings? Let's awaken the country." And by gum, they did. They are a special generation. They did awaken the country. They were determined. They found their strength in the camp and took it out. Talk about the politics, will you?
Yeah, I will. Number one, it was in the 60s that this camp was, and we both were in the 60s. You know what the 60s were like. So it was a freedom to be free, all the things about freedom. But the politics of this is that the one who was stopping this was Joseph Califano, who was head of Health and Human Services under Carter. And this is a Democratic administration that's supposed to be more, progressive concern. And they were just blocking them. And Judith Heumann, who sort of took the lead on this, right? She had polio.
She was a polio victim, right?
Yeah, a polio victim. She was in Brooklyn, right? She took the lead, and she's very articulate, right? And she was talking about how they wouldn't let her go to school because she was in a wheelchair, and they said it was a fire hazard. So her parents had to fight this, right? Her mother was an activist, right? That my kid can't go to school, has to be homeschooled, bullshit, So they fought that, and they finally won that in the city of New York, right? But the politics of this is that there was no sensitivity these were people that in days they used to be put in an institution and die in an institution. And just because you have a disability doesn't mean they did my IQ when I was like 6, 7 years old. I said 160 something plus. So, but then there were limitations. So what they're doing there is they were limiting these people, and they would think, oh, well, they can't have relationships, they can't have sexual relationships or anything like that because they're handicapped, like you were saying, right? And then when they had Camp Jeanette, they weren't under the protective thing of their parents or overprotective parents. I know not overprotective parents, and bottom line is they blossomed and they start relationships like James Leprecht with D'Angelo, what was her, Nancy? They had a love affair, right? So bottom line is as you said, they blossomed. And they were in this non-protective environment. The staff let them bloom, let them become real people. And Judith Heumann wrote a book about being human. That was her surname. And she said, "I am human. Remember, I'm human." And there was a double entendre of words there, right? So bottom line is, these people who had been put away in institutions could actually be productive members of our society, right? Denise Scherer Jacobson has written books, even though, she's written books, even with her condition. And they showed all these people that Al Levy was like a radical. He was handicapped. He was a smoker and pot and smoked cigarettes. And he was a little, real radical kind of guy, but he was handicapped. So, what it was showing in this movie is that these handicapped people are no different than any of their peers, right? Except they're handicapped, right? And we should be more sensitive to this. And from my experiences, even with ADA, people are ignoring ADA. They don't give a damn, Business people, bottom line, they gotta make ends meet, administrators, and bottom line is they have a misperception. Not to get personal, I check over everything, even though I have the little dyslexia. I check over everything. There's no problem, but it's the perception. The perception is that if you have a handicap, you can't function normally. You can't have real romance. You can't have sexual relations. And what this Camp Jeanette staff did is freed them from from their parents' overbearingness, overprotectiveness, and society's limits, and they just blossomed, as you said. So this is the bottom line: is today with ADA, Americans with Disabilities Act, we're still not enforcing it, unfortunately. Now, Judith Heumann just died at 75. And she had lived, and she married this Mexican American guy who also was handicapped in a wheelchair, right? And she worked for the Obama administration. She had a high position, right? She was smart. I mean, she was an intelligent woman, right? But they were limiting her to get education. They were limiting everything. So that's the bottom line. I shouldn't go on and on. How do you want to segue in on this, Jay?
Yeah, I'm glad you pointed out that it was the 60s, not the 70s. And the 60s were, the Vietnam time. I went to a Jewish Federation camp in upstate New York, which was run by social workers. It was called Camp WellMed, it doesn't exist anymore. And I'm sorry that it doesn't, because I think it served a very important purpose. And in fact, I went up to see it last year. I wanted to see what it looked like. I wanted to, have those memories, but it was gone. It was tragic. And I suppose a lot of those camps are gone. But those camps represented a period of American history where people were going to school to be social workers. They were going to school to live lives helping others. I don't know if we have that anymore. For that matter, I don't know whether social work, also has that same kind of drive and motivation as it did. But what I and in my camp, by the way, there were, quote, scholarships, end quote. It was a cheap camp. It didn't cost but a few $100 a whole summer. But there were scholarships of people who couldn't afford that. And the ghetto kids were granted the scholarship. So we had tremendous diversity, every kind of diversity you could imagine. I don't recall whether there were handicapped kids there, but the idea was the same. We want diversity. We want to take you out of an overprotective family. We want to give you freedom, and we want to give you the opportunity to meet other people, including a diversity of people. And we want you to be creative. We want you to, for example, at my camp, the bunk, the group, we set the activities. We did. Nobody told us what to do. You want to do softball? Okay, you can do softball. You want to do it Tuesday at 2:00? Your choice, do it. So what I'm saying is, it gave you a sort of sense of group control. And it was very educational. They had all kinds of programs to teach you things, and the counselors they're all social workers, or most of them, and they were very, very interested in us, and they cared about us. And we, of course, cared about them. And I can remember some of their names today. How many years later is that? Okay. And I was in my preteens and my early teens. So what I'm saying is that, the American ethic at the time, I don't know what it is today, I'm too far away from it, was that kids were overprotected, that kids didn't have the freedom that would let them blossom during the school year. And at home, largely, immigrant families were pretty strict. But for a few weeks of the summer, under the tutelage of social working, caring people, they could blossom in pretty much the same way these kids in the Crip camp movie blossomed. Now, what I'm saying is, it's this blossoming process, the butterfly process, if you will, exists for all kids, not just the handicapped kids. What is marvelous to watch in this movie is that it can be done for all kids. It's not just the kids who are not handicapped. In this case, with this camp, you take the social work mentality in an ordinary group of people, however diverse, and you give it to you the greatest gift imaginable to these kids who are handicapped, so they can enjoy the same blossoming creativity. They can enjoy the same relationships, and it changes their lives forever. So that's the message of this movie. And I'm sorry that the footage isn't good, but the footage is what it was. That's the home footage in black and white. And, the dimensions of it and the production values were not that good, but you got the message because took you back. The movie takes you back to those times. And so you're enveloped in those times. You're there with these kids. You're there and you begin to understand them. You begin to appreciate their challenges and their successes. So this was a kind of Camelot in those days, George. I don't know whether Camelot took place after this period that I'm talking about, the 50s, the 60s. I don't know what happened in the 70s or the 80s. I think maybe things changed, and there weren't these wonderful social workers who would care for you as if you were wedded, wedded to them, fully connected. I don't know what happened after that, but it's worth it for us to take a look through the keyhole of this movie and see what happened, not only to them while they were having the experience in the camp, but after, because the movie follows them in their lives. Some of them didn't do that well, but others did do that well. And I don't think any of them would have done very well if they hadn't developed the confidence, that Camp, was it Jeanette, gave them, the confidence to live in a regular world, to live their lives, knowing that with their thought process and their brains and their will and their intellect, they could do stuff. And that's the value here.
Very revealing filming. I mean, even though the quality wasn't good, it really showed their feelings, their emotions, their thoughts. I mean, amazing, that they're just real people, just happen to be in a wheelchair or have, that condition that Denise Jacobson had. My experience was, I went to Boy Scout camp and Methodist camp in upstate New York. And my experience being an oddball, over there, dark hair, dark eye, with all these blondies right in Methodist church, and then Boy Scout, I didn't really have that freedom. My dad really wanted us to be Americans, converted from Catholic to Protestant Methodist. So I didn't have that experience. But my nephew, who's from this new generation, and he was, he went to Jewish camps all the summers, and it's like he had a very different experience where I was never in tune with my heritage until much later into college. So bottom line is, my experiences were very different. I was trying to be washed out, wash out, immigrant family, get rid of your heritage, just become an American. So that, and this was the 60s and 70s, no, 60s, late 50s, 60s. So my experience was very different. But bottom line is, Joseph Califano, this was under the Carter administration. He didn't give a damn about these people. So whatever happened at Camp Jeanette in the 60s and what they, nurtured their feelings for their own handicapped souls, right? Didn't happen until they actually fought for it. Judith Heumann and Lebrecht in a wheelchair. They told him, can't do this, can't do that. He wanted to be a sound engineer. And he's working in Berkeley as a very successful sound engineer. And he had to literally climb up the steps to get to that top level where they had the sound lab.
He was the one with spina bifida.
Yeah, he had spina bifida, right? Which the woman across, when we were living on Long Island, Farmingdale, the first house, the girl across, she had spina bifida. She was in a wheelchair too. And I remember specifically she had spina bifida. So bottom line is, on this, each one of these handicapped people were blossomed, as you said. They actually became full members of our society. Judith Heumann rose to a under cabinet position in the Obama administration. And lo and behold, the Republican president, George H.W. Bush, the father, Congress passed this ADA and he signed it, right? So, but then backtracking, they've backtracked. Unless you go to court and you're an attorney, unless you go to court and fight this, right? Sometimes it's not enforced, people don't give a damn unless they have to be taken to court.
That's true. And it's a rocky road because there are lawyers out there who take those cases. The statute allows you to recover your fees and all this, and take those cases not necessarily to do good, but to make money, and it's not perfect. I remember one of the characters, maybe it was Judith, was concerned about the subway in New York, and she couldn't take the subway. She had to find other ways for transportation because subway steps are impossible for somebody in a wheelchair. There was no way, no reasonable accommodation, to use the term in the statute. So ultimately, the statute had an effect of requiring public places to make reasonable accommodation for people who are handicapped. Now that hasn't saturated the country. There are a lot of places that still don't do that, but at least it's the law, and you got to give credit to George Bush the first for achieving that,
and the Congress who actually passed it. Yeah. The Democratic Congress or what, but they passed it. So so I chose not to sue these employers because it leaves a bad mark on you. But bottom line is, it's only when these attorneys actually do a lawsuit, when these laws are actually,
they can be very tough on the defendant who refuses to make reasonable accommodation, including changing the infrastructure of the business and the public place. But let me add one other thought I would like to cover with you, and that is this: how do you judge a society? Adolf Hitler would take handicapped people and throw them in a pit. He killed them. That was one of his first great violations of morality. And any country that does that, is failing in morality. But countries that do that and where people care about it, including presidents and everybody on the block, those countries are doing the right thing because they're expressing care and concern for people, for all the people, all the citizens. They're not sidelining them. They're not, withdrawing rights. They're not sending them away or worse, throwing them in the pit. They're expressing the kind of care we would like to see humanity provide for people, all people, including handicapped people. So what I'm saying is one of the metrics of a country, of a society, is how do they treat their handicap. It's very easy to see that some countries treat their handicap much better than others. Some societies are very kind. Kindness and decency is the measure. And I would like to see, the United States be even more, much more decent and kind to everyone. We're not at a period now where that happens.
Oh, God. No. Let's not talk. Let's not get on that tangent.
Get on that, but
January 6th. Oh God. Let's not.
Yeah, but I mean, decency. It's a very it's a qualitative word, decency. And how do you know decency? Well, you know it when you see it. That's how you know decency. Kindness is pretty much the same. And if we were all decent and kind and caring to each other, life would be better in these United States. I don't understand why people don't know that. It's very clear that if you're nice to handicapped people, you're going to be nice to everybody. Why not? And so our level of, what we're going to call it, of kindness and decency is really a demonstration of our society in general, of the quality of our life together in the country. And we have to strive for that. And that's why this movie, in depicting what happened in the 60s and how these people were able to blossom the way that camp made them blossom, how caring counselors and volunteers made them blossom, is so instructive. It really is relevant to current times.
Education. To get sensitivity, you need to educate the public, everybody, about the handicapped, about other issues that we're dealing with right now, where ignorance can breed horrible acts, and viciousness toward these handicapped people that really had limitations, but were not could get beyond that and blossom. So, what you're saying is this. I mean, we grew up in the 60s when that was an age of progressive age, and then we've sort of backtracked, in the last 50, 60 years. But precisely what you're saying, Jay, yep, that's what creates a society where everyone can live together peacefully with each other, rather than fighting in the streets or fighting in the Congress, in the halls of Congress, literally fighting, with knives and guns or whatever they entered and so on. So precisely, we need to change perceptions. And I would really like to see attorneys get in there and start prosecuting some of these handicap cases so that the laws will be abided by.
Yeah, I don't know if we have as many cases today as we had when the statute was first passed. We had a lot of cases here in Hawaii when the statute was first passed. I don't think it happens as much, because you have to be a kind of Don Quixote kind of lawyer. You have to be cause driven, because sometimes you're not going to make any money on a case. Sometimes you make more money on a case, and some of the lawyers, found a way to do that. Sometimes people didn't like them for doing that, but they were serving a purpose, even if they themselves and their motivation were not, really as altruistic as you would want. And I think that there's another element I want to mention before we run out of time, George, and that is this. If I live in a community, if I am caring about people who, are not as fortunate for whatever reason, I have a better life. Not because I started out with a better life. I can say at night when I put my head on the pillow that I have been kind and decent to people, all people, and I have given nutrition to a better society. And so my life is better because my self-esteem is better. My perception of the world, my perception of my role in society is better. I wish more people, could think that thought. It's like giving charity, isn't it? It's giving charity to people who are less fortunate than you are. And so that's what this camp was about. This camp was, a special phenomenon. It didn't last forever. None of them did. But the notion of giving charity, personal charity, and being caring, that's still alive. That's still possible. And you can have a day in which you put your head on the pillow and say, gee whiz, I helped.
One last thing, architecture school, they only think of handicapped ramps. They don't think of most of them, some of my professors like Martin and another one have been very progressive and bringing speakers that know about my kind of handicap. But mostly the view is that you have to have access, but there are other kinds of handicaps that most architects never even think of, and except for the few progressive ones. I'll leave it at that. I don't want to go on and on. Thank you, Jay. Thanks so much.
No, I want to add one more point, just springing off what you just said. George, you can write this down if you want.
Yeah.
We all get old.
Yeah.
OLD. And,
I can't. Yeah.
What that means is, when you're younger, you can look down your nose at somebody who's handicapped. But when you get older, you don't look down your nose so fast, because you could be in the same spot. You could be there with crutches, wheelchair, what have you. You could be looking for somebody to care for you too. You will. It's pretty much the case. So that is a lesson also out of camp, Jeanette and this movie. What do you give it as a rating? And a comprehensive rating, George, not just as a quality of production or anything, but where does it fit for you?
8.5 because of the production values, but the ideas, the thoughts, very sensitive. I'll give it an 8.5 out of 10 on the production values. That black and white stuff really wasn't that good, but it's still a good movie, a good documentary.
I would be in the same range. It might be closer to 8. But let me say this. One thing that troubled me about it is, how come we haven't seen more movies like this, including movies that are not, necessarily documentaries, but movies who treat, handicapped people as real characters? How come we haven't seen that? Because the public still can't stand to watch. That's a problem. It's a problem in this country. But we should have more entertainment, including, fiction, nonfiction, the whole gamut of movies that bring the handicapped people in as characters. Thank you, George. Always nice to talk to you.
Thank you,
Do this
Jay.
again soon.
Thank you, Jay. Aloha.
Thank you so much for watching ThinkTech Hawaii. If you like what we do, please like us and click the subscribe button on YouTube and the follow button on Vimeo. You can also follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn, and donate to us at thinktechhawaii.com. Mahalo.